The Baron cursed the pregnant bride at the church door. The priest closed the gate in silence. The rain came hard that afternoon, hammering the cobblestones outside St. Aurelius like judgment itself. The bells had finished their call to prayer, and the small crowd gathered under the church eaves wasn't there for worship. They were there to watch a scandal unfold. At the steps stood Elena Marin, her white gown muddied to gray, hands trembling against the round of her belly, her veil plastered to her face. Before her, Baron Lucien de Vallon, dressed in black as if mourning something he'd never loved, raised his voice so the whole town could hear. "You think heaven will take you now?" he thundered, his words slicing through the rain. "Bearing my shame beneath his roof?" The people gasped, hungry for sin disguised as righteousness. Elena didn't speak. She couldn't. Her breath came in short, painful bursts, her tears lost in the downpour. The priest, Father Gabriel, stood at the doorway, one hand on the wooden gate, the other clutching his rosary tight enough to bruise. He had baptized the Baron as a child, buried his father, and now watched the son damn himself with words no sermon could cleanse. "Lucian," Gabriel began, voice low, but the Baron turned on him. "Close your doors, Father. If this is God's house, let it not be defiled by a liar and her bastard." The insult struck like lightning. Elena flinched but didn't fall. Her fingers pressed the small silver cross at her neck, whispering something only heaven heard. "I came for forgiveness," she said softly, "not permission." The Baron's jaw tightened. "You came for pity, but there is none left." He stepped back, gesturing for the guards to drag her away. The priest didn't move. The rain streamed down his cassock, his face unreadable, the rosary still wrapped around his hand. "There are two doors in this world," he said finally, "the ones men close, and the ones God opens." Then, in a motion that silenced everyone, he pulled the gate shut, not against her, but against the crowd. The iron latch fell with a hollow clang, leaving the Baron outside in the rain. Elena stared at him through the bars, disbelief trembling into something sacred. Inside the courtyard, the priest's voice rose in prayer, quiet but defiant, and the sound carried through the storm like a promise the world couldn't break. The Baron cursed her one last time, his words lost to thunder, and rode off into the gray. Elena sank to her knees, clutching her belly, her lips moving with his name. But when she looked up, Father Gabriel was already kneeling beside her, his hands steady as he whispered, "You're safe now. God can bear the silence better than men can." By nightfall the rain had slowed, leaving the chapel wrapped in fog that moved like breath between its stone ribs. Inside, candles burned low, their light trembling across the pews and the cracked plaster saints that had seen too many sins to be surprised by one more. Father Gabriel walked the narrow aisle with slow, careful steps, his boots echoing softly on the wet floor. Elena sat near the altar, wrapped in a wool cloak he'd found in the vestry, her hair undone, her eyes hollow. She hadn't spoken since the gate closed. "The fire's weak," he murmured, adding another log to the hearth. "You'll need warmth more than pride tonight." She looked up, lips pale. "I shouldn't be here. The Baron will send his men." "Then they'll find the church full," he said, forcing a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've hidden worse souls than yours." She pressed a hand to her stomach. "He'll say the child isn't his. And you? I'll say it's God's." Her voice trembled, but the words didn't. Gabriel turned away, pretending to straighten the hymnals to hide the sting behind his eyes. "Faith like that scares men of power," he said. "They can't own what they can't name." For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the wind sighing through the cracked glass above the altar. When she finally spoke again, her tone was softer. "Why did you close the gate?" "Because sometimes mercy sounds like silence," he said, "and I'd rather damn myself than watch another man's cruelty wear God's name." She studied him, unsure whether he spoke as a priest or a man. "You'll lose your place for this?" "Then I'll lose it clean." He knelt before the altar, whispering prayers that shook more than he meant them to. Outside, hooves splashed through puddles, search parties fanning through the town, but none dared breach the gate. Inside, the chapel glowed warm and secret, a pocket of grace carved from the world's spite. Elena watched him pray until her eyes blurred. "You think he's listening?" she asked. "Always," he said. "Just not always the way we expect." She leaned her head against the pew, exhaustion softening her features. "Then tell him," she whispered, "that I'm tired of being a lesson." Gabriel looked at her, the candlelight tracing her face, and for the first time in years, he prayed not as a priest, but as a man who wanted heaven to prove him wrong. The wind had calmed, but the chapel still seemed to breathe with the storm's memory. Candlelight wavered against the stone walls, painting the crucifix in long, flickering shadows. Father Gabriel sat beside the confessional, the door open, his robe damp at the hem. Elena stood a few feet away, her hands clasped tight over her heart as if she feared it might break loose and betray her. "If I speak," she said softly, "will you still call me daughter?" "There are no orphans here," he answered. Her eyes filled. "When I first met the Baron, I thought God had sent me a protector. I was poor, and he promised safety. I thought vows could clean the shame of need. But when he learned I carried his child before the blessing, he called me blasphemy made flesh." Gabriel looked down at his hands, at the rosary that now felt heavier than iron. "And you believed him?" "I believed silence would save me." She drew a shaky breath. But it only fed him. The priest closed his eyes, the candles hissing as if in protest. "Sin is not what you are," he said quietly. "It's what cruelty makes of mercy when men twist it to their liking." She stepped closer. "Then why did God let him speak in his name?" "Because he lets all of us," Gabriel whispered, "even when it hurts him." For a moment the air between them felt too alive, too fragile to hold. Elena sank to her knees. "Father, I've carried this alone. I wanted to believe he still saw me, but I felt invisible in every prayer." Gabriel knelt beside her, their hands almost touching on the stone floor. "He saw you when you stood in the rain. He saw you when I shut the gate. The world calls that silence. But it's his way of staying near." Her shoulders shook once, then stilled. "If that's true," she said, "then I forgive him." He looked at her, startled. "Forgive? For letting men speak louder than love?" The words stole the breath from the room. Gabriel bowed his head, the cross above them catching the light. "Then tonight," he said, "you've taught me more of faith than I ever preached." When she finally slept on the pew near the altar, he stayed awake, watching the candle burn lower, realizing that sometimes confession isn't a woman's repentance, it's a priest's redemption. By dawn, the storm had returned, rolling down from the mountains like an army of gray ghosts, pounding the chapel roof until the rafters groaned and the bell rope swayed against the tower wall. Father Gabriel stood at the altar, lighting what few candles the wind hadn't stolen, his hands trembling not from cold, but from something closer to dread. The night's confessions still echoed in his chest, her voice trembling between belief and defiance, her tears landing on stone as if she were baptizing her own pain. He'd heard countless confessions over 20 years of priesthood, but none like hers. Her words hadn't asked forgiveness. They'd offered it, to God, to herself, even to him, a man who had spent half his life hiding behind Scripture when mercy demanded more than sermons. Now she slept near the hearth, wrapped in his cloak. Her breath soft, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. The child stirred once beneath her ribs, a quiet flutter that felt like proof of something divine. Outside, lightning cracked open the sky, followed by a thunder that shook the glass from the narrow window beside the altar. Gabriel turned, covering her with a blanket as the wind slipped through the broken pane. "Rest," he whispered, though she couldn't hear. "The world's already done enough to you." He knelt then, hands clasped, and prayed, not with words, but with the raw ache of a man who didn't know what else to do. "If I have sinned, let it be in her defense. If I must fall, let it be between her and those who would curse her again." The candle nearest him flickered wildly, its flame bending as if to listen. When he opened his eyes, the chapel door creaked. He turned fast. Heart pounding. It was Brother Mathieu, a young novice sent from the abbey, soaked and pale. "Father," he said breathlessly, "the Baron's riders have gathered at the square. They're saying you've taken the woman into sanctuary." Gabriel stood, steady but cold. "They're not wrong." "He's demanding her return," the boy said. "He says the church defies him." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Then let it." He looked toward the sleeping woman, and then back to the trembling novice. "Fetch no one. Lock the vestry and stay behind me if you must stay at all." Mathieu hesitated. "Father, they'll burn this place." Gabriel smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Then we'll give them light enough to see their sin." The storm intensified, rain turning the courtyard into a mirror of black water. As he stepped outside, Gabriel's cassock whipped around him, the wind pulling at the cross on his chest. He saw torches in the distance, voices rising in angry chorus. "Bring her out!" someone shouted. "God sees your blasphemy!" But Gabriel only raised his voice above the wind, chanting the old psalm, "Deliver me from blood guilt, O Lord, for my tongue shall sing of thy righteousness." The crowd faltered. The Baron's captain reined his horse closer, his armor slick with rain. "You'd risk excommunication for a harlot?" Gabriel's voice stayed calm. "For a mother," the captain sneered. "Then you share her sin." "I share her humanity," the priest said, stepping forward. "And that's all God ever asked of any of us." Lightning tore through the sky again, and for a moment the world turned white. The torches, the gate, the cross glinting above the door. When the thunder rolled, the crowd flinched as if heaven itself had answered him. The captain turned his horse and rode back toward the square, leaving curses in his wake. Gabriel lowered his hands, chest heaving, rain streaking down his face. Behind him, Elena stood in the doorway, one hand on her stomach, her eyes wide. "You shouldn't have faced them," she whispered. "They'll come again." "I know," he said, voice hoarse. "But next time they'll find faith waiting." She stepped closer, her face pale in the candlelight spilling from inside. "Why are you doing this for me?" He met her gaze, the storm roaring around them. "Because somewhere along the way," he said, "men like me forgot that mercy isn't spoken, it's kept." And as thunder rolled once more, he bowed his head before her, not as a priest before a sinner, but as a man before the proof that heaven still trusted him enough to test him. The wind carried the scent of smoke long before the first torchlight glowed beyond the trees, and Father Gabriel knew the Baron hadn't taken his silence as surrender. He moved through the chapel with the calm of a man who had already made peace with consequence, checking each door latch, each candle, each sign of life he had promised to protect. Elena sat by the hearth, her face pale, her breath uneven, one hand pressed to the small of her back. "They're coming again, aren't they?" she asked, her voice brittle but steady. He nodded once. "Then we'll meet them with prayer," he said. "If they bring flame, we'll answer with faith." She tried to smile, but the pain bent her forward, a soft cry escaping before she could stop it. He was beside her instantly, the worry in his eyes sharper than any sermon. "It's too soon," he whispered. "How long have the pains been?" "Since the thunder," she gasped, clutching at the bench. "The child doesn't care about time." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling like the echo of her agony. Gabriel fetched blankets, water, whatever meager things the chapel could offer, his trembling hands betraying the calm of his voice. "Breathe, Elena. Just breathe. You're not alone." She met his eyes, sweat glistening on her forehead. "I don't deserve this kindness." "No one does," he said softly. "That's what makes it holy." Hours passed in fractured moments, rain pounding the roof, candles guttering, her cries mingling with the storm, until it seemed the whole earth labored with her. When at last the sound changed, a weak, new wail rising through the thunder, Gabriel froze, awe breaking across his face. He wrapped the child in his stole, the only clean cloth left, and placed him gently in her arms. "A boy," she whispered, tears mixing with rain as the lightning flashed across their faces. "He's beautiful." "He's proof," Gabriel said quietly, voice trembling with something between exhaustion and wonder. "Proof that even curses can bloom." Outside, the torches drew closer, voices shouting through the wind. "Open the gate, by order of the Baron." Gabriel rose, his cassock heavy with rain, and looked toward the door. "You'll do no such thing," he told the novice who stood frozen by the wall. "If they want sin, let them find only silence." Elena reached for his hand, panic cutting through her fatigue. "They'll kill you." "Then I'll die in the light," he said simply. He stepped into the storm, rain slashing across his face as he met the crowd gathered at the gate. The Baron's men stared up at him, torches hissing in the downpour. "You would burn God's house?" he shouted above the wind. "Would you drown his mercy to feed your pride?" The captain hesitated, but behind him the Baron appeared on horseback, cloak whipping, eyes alight with rage. "You've defied me, priest. Give her up." "She's already delivered," Gabriel said, his voice ringing through the storm. "A child innocent of your name and your sin. Leave this ground, or I'll call heaven down to bear witness." The Baron sneered. "Heaven is deaf." "Not tonight," Gabriel answered. Lightning cracked between them, striking the church bell so hard it rang out through the valley. The sound silenced everything, the torches, the shouts, even the thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The Baron's horse reared, nearly throwing him, and the men stumbled back, muttering of omens. Gabriel stood unmoved, the bell still trembling above him, his soaked cassock clinging like armor. Behind him, the newborn cried again, the sound rising pure and defiant into the night, a hymn stronger than any curse. And as the wind carried that fragile cry over the walls, even the Baron turned pale, realizing too late that what he'd tried to destroy was already sanctified. By morning the storm had broken, but the world hadn't softened. The sky was bruised violet, the ground slick with mud and fallen branches. Father Gabriel stood beneath the bell tower, his hands still raw from holding the gate through the night. The torches had burned out hours ago, but he knew it wasn't over. Inside, Elena slept beside her newborn, both wrapped in borrowed vestments that smelled faintly of incense and smoke. She looked pale, fragile, but alive, her breath rising in small, steady waves. The child stirred now and then, each soft cry like a whisper reminding the chapel that it still had a purpose. Gabriel traced the sign of the cross in the air above them and whispered, "Deliver us from pride and from power," before stepping outside into the new light. That's when he saw them. 2 riders, mud up to their stirrups, coming slow up the hill. The Baron led, his black coat torn and his face drawn with sleepless fury. But there was something brittle in his posture. The arrogance cracked, though not gone. Behind him rode the local magistrate, pale and nervous, clutching a scroll. Gabriel met them halfway, his robe dragging through the wet grass, the wind tossing his hair across his face. "Father," the magistrate stammered, "the Baron demands you release the woman. The council has no authority in God's house," Gabriel said calmly. "You've sheltered a criminal," the Baron interrupted, his voice hoarse. "She bore my child in sin and defied her vows. The church will answer for this blasphemy." Gabriel studied him, the man who once built half the town's wealth on the backs of servants who never spoke his name aloud. "The only blasphemy here," he said, "is the belief that God's mercy belongs to you." The Baron's eyes flared. "You dare speak to me of mercy while you harbor my shame?" "Your shame sleeps inside," Gabriel said evenly, "and his cry is the only honest prayer this valley has heard in years." The magistrate swallowed hard, stepping back as the tension thickened. The Baron dismounted, boots sinking into the mud, and strode towards the chapel door. Gabriel blocked his path, spreading his arms wide. "One more step, and you break the vow you made at your own baptism," he warned. "You'll damn what's left of you." The Baron stopped, rain dripping from his hat brim, eyes searching the priest's face for fear, and finding none. "You think your robes make you holy? You think closing that gate absolved her?" Gabriel's voice lowered. "I don't believe holiness lives in robes or walls, but I know when a man curses an innocent woman in God's name, the heavens keep the echo." The Baron laughed, but the sound was thin, cracked at the edges. "Then let the heavens judge me." He shoved Gabriel aside and threw open the chapel door. Inside, the light from the broken window caught Elena as she stirred awake, clutching the child to her chest. The Baron froze. The sight of her, small, shaking but fearless, hit harder than any sermon. "Lucian," she whispered, "if you came for forgiveness, you found it sleeping." He stared at the baby, its tiny hands curled in the fabric of her sleeve, and something unreadable passed over his face. For the first time, he looked unsure of what he was meant to hate. Gabriel stepped forward quietly. "You cursed her before God," he said. "Now witness what that curse gave life to." The Baron's lips trembled, and for a brief, flickering moment, pride gave way to terror. Then he turned, his boots squelching in the mud, and walked out into the gray morning without a word, the echo of the bell from the night before still ringing somewhere deep inside him. That night the valley held its breath, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked wood and smoke from torches that hadn't burned clean. Father Gabriel couldn't sleep. Every shadow against the chapel walls looked like the shape of vengeance returning. Every gust through the cracked window sounded like a voice whispering that grace never lasts. He walked the aisles in silence, whispering prayers half remembered, half made up, the kind of prayers that didn't ask for miracles, just for endurance. Outside, the fog rolled low across the ground, and from somewhere down the slope came the faint glow of fire. His stomach clenched. The Baron had left, but his men hadn't. He stepped out into the courtyard, the mud cold beneath his feet, and saw them. 3 figures near the tree line, feeding a blaze that licked upward with furious hunger. Within minutes, The grass caught, dry from the heat of the afternoon sun, and the wind carried sparks toward the chapel roof. "Mathieu!" he shouted, the young novice stumbling from the rectory. "Fetch water, now!" Together they fought the creeping flames with buckets and prayer, throwing water faster than the storm could supply. Inside, Elena stirred, startled by the noise, clutching her child tight. "Father," she cried, "what's happening?" "Stay inside," he called back. "Keep the boy near the altar." She shook her head, refusing to hide, and rushed to the door. The sight of the burning fields froze her in place, her eyes wide, the reflection of orange and gold turning her tears to glass. "They'll burn it all," she whispered. Gabriel turned towards the men, his voice cutting through the smoke. "This is sacred ground." One of them laughed. "Not to him." "It ain't." The priest picked up a fallen torch, its flame sputtering in the wind, and stood between them and the door. "Then let your fire meet mine," he said. They hesitated, the certainty in his voice heavier than threat. For a heartbeat, no one moved, just the hiss of rain, the crackle of burning straw, the whimper of the newborn behind the door. Then a spark leapt to the roof beam, catching fast. Gabriel shouted for Mathieu, but the boy was gone, likely to fetch help from the village. He looked back to the chapel, Elena's terrified face framed in the doorway, and knew the fire would win. He ran to her, pushing her toward the rear exit. "There's a path behind the hill. Take him. Go." "And you?" she demanded. "I can't leave the sanctuary," he said. "It's not stone anymore," she pleaded. "It's us. It's this." Her words hit harder than smoke. For a second he wanted to believe her, to run with them into the dark and never look back, but duty wrapped its cold hands around his heart. "If the church burns, someone must stay to prove mercy still breathes," he said. She reached for him, her fingers trembling against his sleeve. "You'll die for walls that never saved anyone." "Maybe," he whispered, "but walls don't need saving. People do." She kissed the cross hanging from his neck, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. "Then save me one last time," she said, and before he could answer, she pressed the child into his arms and fled through the side gate. He watched her vanish into the smoke, then turned back to the inferno growing around him. The flames climbed the altar first, devouring wood and wax. But when they reached the painting of the Virgin above the nave, the wind shifted suddenly, pushing the fire back toward the doorway. Gabriel clutched the infant tighter, whispering a prayer that was equal parts surrender and promise. "If mercy lives, let it find her." When the roof finally gave, the sky turned gold, and the priest stepped through the doorway carrying the crying child into the rain, the fire behind him roaring like judgment, the world before him waiting to decide which one of them it would spare. The storm that came with morning was unlike any before it. Thick sheets of rain that fell not in forgiveness, but in fury, washing the ash from the valley as if heaven itself refused to let the world forget. Smoke still curled from the chapel ruins, the stone walls standing like ribs around a heart that had already stopped beating. Father Gabriel moved through what was left, every step sinking into mud and soot, the infant wrapped tightly against his chest beneath his scorched robe. The boy slept now, exhausted from crying, his tiny breath warm against the priest's collar. The bell tower had collapsed during the night, its twisted frame lying half-buried among the embers, but the cross that crowned it still glinted faintly through the steam. Gabriel stopped there, bowing his head, his throat raw from smoke and silence. "It's done," he whispered. "The fire took what men could not." He looked toward the tree line, where he'd last seen Elena disappear. No sign of her, no movement but the wind through the blackened grass. For the first time since closing the gate, doubt crept into him, heavy and cold. What if she hadn't made it? What if mercy had come too late? He sank to his knees in the wet ash, pressing his forehead to the earth. "You said silence was your way," he murmured. "Then speak through it now." The answer came not from the sky, but from the road, the distant rhythm of hooves against mud. He rose fast, heart hammering. Out of the grey mist emerged the Baron, cloaked and haggard, his fine clothes ruined, his face streaked with rain and soot. There was no army behind him, no torches, no arrogance, just a man whose pride had burned down with the church. He stopped a few paces away, staring at the ruins, then at the priest holding the child. "I didn't order this," he said quietly, voice frayed. "But I lit the first fire the day I cursed her." Gabriel didn't move. "Your words were the match," he said. "Your silence let it burn." The Baron nodded once, as if agreeing with his own indictment. "Is she alive?" "I don't know," Gabriel admitted, the truth trembling in his chest. "But this one is." He pulled the blanket aside, revealing the boy's sleeping face. For a long time the Baron just stared, the lines around his eyes softening. "He looks like her," he said. "And you?" "No," Gabriel said. "He looks like Grace, undeserved and still here." The Baron took a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. "I came to make it right." "Then start by kneeling," the priest said. "The ground's already holy." The Baron hesitated, then sank to his knees in the mud, his hands trembling as he reached out. "May I?" Gabriel studied him, then placed the child carefully in his arms. The Baron held him as though the infant were made of fire, and forgiveness both. "I spent my life thinking power could cleanse sin," he said, "but it only hides it deeper." Gabriel's voice was soft. "Now you know the cost of forgetting that mercy isn't weakness. It's the only strength heaven values." The Baron bowed his head, tears lost to rain. "Tell her," he said, "if she lives that I—" He stopped, unable to finish. Gabriel took the boy back, pulling the blanket tighter. "I'll tell her," he promised. The Baron rose slowly, turned toward the ruins, and crossed himself before walking away into the mist, leaving footprints that the rain began to erase the moment they were made. Gabriel watched until he was gone, then whispered, "Even fire kneels before mercy." Behind him, the child stirred, letting out a single fragile cry that carried through the valley, and for the first time, it didn't sound like loss. It sounded like an answer. When dusk came, the rain lightened to a silver mist that clung to every blade of grass and stone like a shroud. Father Gabriel had not left the chapel grounds all day. His strength was fading, his hands blistered from carrying buckets, his breath shallow from the smoke that still lingered in his lungs. Yet he would not rest. The child slept near the remnants of the altar, wrapped in dry cloths scavenged from the sacristy, while Gabriel prayed aloud, half to the boy, half to whatever presence still lingered among the ashes. "Let her be safe," he whispered. "Let her find the road before the world remembers her name." But even as he spoke, something shifted in the distance, a shadow moving against the dimming horizon. He turned sharply, gripping the cross that hung around his neck like a weapon. Out of the fog came a figure limping up the path, barefoot, cloak torn, hair plastered to her face. For a moment he thought it a vision conjured by exhaustion, but then the figure called his name. "Gabriel!" He stumbled forward, knees nearly buckling from relief. "Elena," he breathed, catching her as she swayed. Her hands were scraped raw, her face streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes were alive, blazing with something holy. "You made it," he whispered. She laughed, a sound cracked but alive. You think a woman who's carried shame this long would let a little fire stop her?" He smiled faintly, guiding her inside. When she saw the child, her breath hitched, and she fell to her knees beside him. "He's all right?" "He's waiting for you," Gabriel said. She reached out, touching her son's cheek with trembling fingers, her lips moving in a silent prayer. "He has your calm," she murmured, "and your stubbornness." Gabriel chuckled softly. "Then he's doomed to argue with heaven." They stayed like that for a long time, the world shrinking to the small circle of candlelight that held them. Finally, she turned to him, her expression changing, gentle, grateful, but lined with a grief that had nowhere else to go. "The Baron," she said quietly. "He came?" "Yes," Gabriel replied. "He saw the child. He left in silence." She bowed her head. "I once begged God to punish him. Now I only want him to forgive him." "You already have," Gabriel said. "That's why he will." She looked up, eyes shining. "You speak like you've seen his face." "I've seen yours," he said before he could stop himself. The words hung between them. Trembling like a flame about to choose between burning and dying. She reached for his hand, not in passion but in absolution, her touch gentle, certain. "You gave me faith when I had none left," she said. "You reminded me that God doesn't speak through thunder. He speaks through men who dare to stand still." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking deep. "And you," he said, "showed me that grace wears the face of the condemned." Outside, the last light of day bled through the broken window, painting the ruined walls in gold. Elena stood, lifting the child into her arms, and faced what was left of the altar. "This isn't a ruin," she said softly. "It's a beginning." She turned to Gabriel, her voice steady now. "Tomorrow I'll leave this valley. He deserves a life without ghosts." "And you?" he asked. "I'll carry mine until they learn to bless me," she said. He nodded, though the ache in his chest deepened. As the first stars pierced the fog, he followed her outside, watching her kneel before the half-buried cross near the gate. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal and whispered something he couldn't hear. When she rose, the mist caught her tears and turned them to silver. "Goodbye, Father," she said. "Goodbye, Elena," he replied. "The gate will stay open this time." She smiled faintly, and for the first time since the curse, both of them believed it. Dawn came pale and uncertain, stretching thin fingers of light through the valley where smoke no longer rose, and the world smelled of wet earth and ash. Father Gabriel stood beneath the ruined arch of St. Aurelius, the child in his arms, listening to the soft hum of the morning wind threading through the hollow bell tower. The air still carried the echo of fire, yet something purer lived beneath it. A silence so complete, it felt alive. Beyond the gate, the road wound east toward the hills, and down that road walked Elena, her figure small against the horizon, her cloak drawn tight, her child's faint cry drifting back to him like a hymn carried on breath. He had tried to sleep, but his body refused rest. His soul was too loud. The night had left his hands blistered, his cassock burned at the hem, and yet he felt no pain. Only a strange calm that lived somewhere between exhaustion and revelation. "The church burned," he whispered, looking at the broken stones around him. But faith didn't. He turned toward the altar ruins and laid the boy down upon a folded cloak, tracing a small cross on his brow. "Your mother will name you," he murmured. "Not I. She's earned that right." The child stirred, fingers curling in the air as if grasping at invisible light. Gabriel smiled faintly and rose, walking toward the gate that once divided the world between the cursed and the pure. The iron had cooled now, twisted but unbroken, the hinges blackened but still holding. He pushed it open, its creak low and tired, like an old man sighing. Outside, the valley shimmered under the new sun, steam rising from the fields that yesterday had burned. He could see tracks in the mud, hooves, footprints, the long drag of something heavy being carried away. Maybe the Baron, maybe the past itself. The priest closed his eyes, hearing again the echo of Elena's voice from the night before. You reminded me that God doesn't speak through thunder. He speaks through men who dare to stand still. He wondered if she knew that she had spoken her own gospel into existence. Behind him, a sound broke the quiet, the crunch of boots on gravel. He turned and found the Baron standing at the threshold, no guards, no pride, just a man stripped bare of everything but shame. His face was drawn, eyes rimmed red, hands empty. For a moment neither spoke. Then the Baron stepped forward, hat in hand. I couldn't sleep, he said, his voice hoarse. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire, and her face behind it. Gabriel's voice was calm. Then you still have a soul. The Baron bowed his head. I came to rebuild it. Gabriel studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the blackened stones. Then start where you cursed her. Lay the first stone yourself. The Baron dropped to his knees, mud staining his fine trousers, and pressed both palms to the wet earth. Forgive me, he whispered, though not to the priest, to the place itself. Gabriel stepped back, watching the man weep like a penitent child, and for the first time since the night of the storm, he smiled. She already has, he said softly. The Baron looked up, but the priest was no longer by the gate. He had gone to the bell tower, where the sun touched the broken cross at its peak. He knelt and prayed for the valley, for the child, for the woman who had taught him that silence can be holy. When the breeze rose, it carried the faint toll of the fallen bell, a single note that rolled through the morning light like a heartbeat refusing to stop. And though no crowd gathered, no ceremony blessed it, that sound was enough. It was the church beginning again, not from stone or sermon, but from mercy that no fire could consume. If you felt the weight of faith in silence today, let this story stay with you. Please like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of the West, where every tale remembers the souls who stood between mercy and judgment. Tell us in the comments, if you were the priest at that gate, would you have closed it or left it open forever?